December 24th, 1914. Europe was burning in the flames of a brutal war. Across France and Belgium, nearly 1 million soldiers were trapped in muddy trenches, surrounded by barbed wire, artillery craters, and death. The war had already shattered the optimism that many soldiers carried with them when they first marched to the front. They had believed the war would be over by Christmas. Instead, Christmas arrived, and the war was still raging. On one side of the trenches stood British and French soldiers. On the other side stood German soldiers. They had spent months trying to kill each other. Machine guns fired day and night. Snipers waited silently in the fog. Artillery shells shook the earth like thunder. Between them lay a deadly wasteland called No Man's Land, where thousands of bodies were left unburied. No one dared step into it, because stepping out meant certain death. But on this cold winter night, something impossible began to happen. At first, it was just a sound. Soft, faint, almost impossible to believe. From the German trenches, British soldiers heard singing. A Christmas carol. Still Nacht. Heilige Nacht. Silent Night. Slowly, another voice joined. Then another, until the entire German trench was singing. The British soldiers listened in disbelief. For a moment, the guns were silent. Then something even stranger happened. The British soldiers began singing back. And in that moment, the war stopped. Chapter 1. The war that was supposed to end by Christmas. When World War I began in the summer of 1914, many people believed it would be a short war. Crowds filled the streets of European capitals, cheering for their soldiers. Young men volunteered in huge numbers. They imagined glory, honor, and adventure. Few understood what modern warfare truly meant. Machine guns could fire 600 bullets per minute. Artillery shells could wipe out entire battalions in seconds. The battlefield quickly turned into a nightmare. One of the earliest turning points came during the massive clash known as the Battle of the Marne. After this battle, neither side could achieve a decisive victory. Instead of moving forward, both armies dug into the ground. Miles of trenches stretched across Europe, from the North Sea all the way to Switzerland. This became known as the Western Front. Life in the trenches was miserable. Soldiers lived in mud and water. Rats crawled through the trenches. Lice infested uniforms. Dead bodies often remained nearby for days or weeks. Every morning soldiers feared the same command. Over the top. That meant climbing out of the trench and charging into enemy fire. Thousands died in minutes. By December 1914, the soldiers on both sides had already witnessed horrors that would haunt them forever. But something unexpected was also happening. Many soldiers began to realize something strange. The men in the enemy trenches were just like them. They were farmers, teachers, factory workers, fathers, sons. They spoke different languages, but they shared the same fear, the same exhaustion, and the same longing for home. Chapter 2. The first signs of the truce. As Christmas approached, the weather became colder. Frost covered the muddy battlefield. Snow dusted the broken trees and barbed wire. Inside the trenches, soldiers tried to remember what Christmas felt like back home. Many received small packages from their families. Letters, chocolate, cigarettes, photographs. For the German army, something special arrived. Thousands of small Christmas trees sent by the Kaiser himself. Person, Wilhelm II. German soldiers placed the small trees along the edges of their trenches. At night, they lit candles on the branches. From the British lines, soldiers looked across No Man's Land and saw tiny glowing lights. It looked almost magical, like Christmas decorations in the middle of hell. Then the singing started. German soldiers began singing carols. Silent Night, Adeste Fideles. The British soldiers recognized the melodies, and they joined in. For the first time in months, the battlefield echoed with music instead of gunfire. Then a German voice shouted across the darkness. English soldier, you know shoot, we know shoot. At first, no one moved. It could have been a trap, but slowly, a German soldier climbed out of his trench. He walked into No Man's Land, unarmed, hands raised. British soldiers held their rifles, watching, waiting. Then something incredible happened. A British soldier climbed out too. The two men walked toward each other across the frozen battlefield. When they met, they shook hands. Chapter 3. The night the war stopped. Soon, dozens of soldiers climbed out of their trenches. Then hundreds. They met in the middle of No Man's Land, where only hours earlier, They had been trying to kill each other. They exchanged cigarettes, chocolate, buttons from their uniforms. Some traded hats. Others shared photographs of their families. Many tried to communicate using broken words, hand gestures, and laughter. One British soldier later wrote that the Germans kept saying, "Tomorrow, you shoot. Today, we no shoot." The soldiers buried their dead together. For weeks, bodies had been lying in no man's land. Now, British and German soldiers worked side by side, digging graves. They held small funeral services. Sometimes the prayers were spoken in two languages. Then came one of the most famous moments of the entire war. Someone brought out a football. Soon, soldiers from both sides began kicking the ball across the frozen ground. A game began. British soldiers versus German soldiers. Right there on the battlefield, where thousands had already died. No referees. No uniforms. Just men playing a simple game. For a moment, the war felt very far away. Chapter 4. When generals heard about it. While soldiers were celebrating together on the front lines, their commanders were furious. High-ranking officers believed fraternizing with the enemy was extremely dangerous. If soldiers began seeing the enemy as human, they might refuse to fight. And that is exactly what many generals feared. Orders were quickly sent down the chain of command. The truce had to end. Artillery units were instructed to fire again. Snipers were ordered back to their positions. Some officers even threatened punishment for soldiers who continued the truce. Slowly, the soldiers returned to their trenches. Many waved goodbye to the men they had just met, men they might soon have to kill. One British soldier later wrote, "We shook hands, wished each other luck, and then went back to our trenches." The next morning, the guns began firing again. Chapter 5. The day after Christmas. On the morning of December 26, 1914, the battlefield looked strangely peaceful. The snow-covered ground of no man's land was filled with footprints. Boot prints from British soldiers. Boot prints from German soldiers. Only hours earlier, they had been standing together here, talking, laughing, and sharing food. But now, they were back in their trenches. Many soldiers woke up with a strange feeling. They had spent Christmas with the enemy, and now they were expected to kill them again. Some soldiers deliberately fired their rifles above the enemy trenches, trying not to hit anyone. Others avoided shooting at all. Officers quickly noticed what was happening. They ordered artillery units to begin firing again. The loud explosions shattered the fragile peace that had formed during Christmas. One British soldier later wrote in his diary, "Yesterday we shook hands with the Germans. Today we are trying to kill them again. It feels wrong." But the war machine had already started moving again. And once war begins, it is very hard to stop. Chapter 6. Letters that shocked the world. In the weeks after Christmas, soldiers began writing letters home. Many of those letters described the unbelievable events of the truce. Families reading these letters could hardly believe what they were seeing. Newspapers across Europe soon started publishing the stories. Headlines described how enemies had met peacefully in no man's land, how they had shared food, how they had buried the dead together, and even played football. For people far away from the battlefield, the story was shocking, because it revealed something powerful. The soldiers fighting the war did not always hate each other. Many civilians began asking an uncomfortable question. If the soldiers could stop fighting for one night, why couldn't the leaders stop the war entirely? But governments quickly realized something dangerous. These stories could weaken support for the war. So military leaders tried to control the narrative. Some newspapers were discouraged from publishing too many details. The Christmas truce slowly disappeared from official reports. But the soldiers never forgot it. Chapter 7. The men who met their enemies. Years later, many veterans spoke about the strange friendships that formed during that night. Some British soldiers remembered sharing cigarettes with German soldiers. Others talked about exchanging small souvenirs, buttons, badges, hats. One soldier described meeting a German who had worked in London before the war. The German spoke perfect English. They joked about how strange the war felt. Another soldier remembered seeing photographs of German families, children, wives, parents. It was a powerful moment, because suddenly the enemy was no longer just a target in the distance. He was a human being, someone with a life, just like them. One British soldier later said something that historians often quote. "If we had been left alone, the war would have ended right there." Of course, that never happened. But for a few hours, the soldiers experienced something the generals feared the most. Empathy. Chapter 8. How the war grew even more brutal. After 1914, the war changed. The early optimism disappeared completely. Both sides began developing new and more deadly weapons. Machine guns became even more powerful. Artillery bombardments became longer and more destructive. But the most terrifying weapon appeared in 1915. Poison gas. During the Second Battle of Ypres, clouds of chlorine gas drifted across the battlefield. Soldiers choked and collapsed as their lungs filled with burning chemicals. Later, mustard gas would cause even worse suffering. The war became a nightmare of mud, explosions, and chemical weapons. Battles like the Battle of Verdun lasted for months and killed hundreds of thousands. The small moment of peace during Christmas 1914 now felt like a distant memory. The soldiers who had shaken hands in no man's land were now trapped in a much darker war. Chapter 9. The Last Survivors Remember. Decades later, when the war was long over, the last surviving veterans were asked about the Christmas Truce. Many of them were old men by then, but they remembered that night clearly. Some said it was the strangest moment of their lives. Others said it was the most beautiful, because in the middle of the most brutal war in history, they had seen something unexpected: human kindness. One veteran described watching German soldiers light small Christmas trees along their trench line. Another remembered hearing the song Silent Night echo across the battlefield. That song had been sung by both sides, in two different languages, but the same melody. It reminded them that despite the uniforms and the flags, they were not so different. The Christmas truce became a symbol, a reminder that even during war, peace is still possible. We will meet again.